Welcome to the last section of the Evaluation and Sustainability module for your online grant training. So far, we've covered quantitative evaluation, qualitative evaluation, program sustainability, and replicability, which means we're on to scaling up and sharing knowledge. When we think about scaling up, one of the things that you need to consider when you read the grant guidelines is what is the goal of the funding? Is it to prove a brand new idea? Is it to validate that something could be used in multiple communities or multiple organizations? Or is it truly to help implement that proven, validated idea? Where are we at? Initial concept, validation, or scale up? Distribute and get this great work, this great information into all sorts of other communities and organizations. So on the screen is an example of one such grant. We see a lot of government funds. That tends to be the place for scale up, where they're saying, if you've got a proven, validated idea, we can help scale it up. And in this case, it's in the education space. Now, scaling up also exists in foundation grants. Many grant makers love, to fund new, innovative ideas that have never been tried before. But you'll also find grant makers that say, if you have that amazing new idea that has worked, that you have the data, the evaluation results to prove the impact, let's get it out there. Let's let other organizations know about what worked in your setting so that they can try it too. So the scaling up that we're talking about, well, it's relying on our evaluation efforts. It's relying on our qualitative and quantitative evaluation methods to say, what do you have that prove, that validate that this project, this program, this concept, that it worked, that it was awesome in your setting, and maybe could be used in another. In order to validate a concept, well, what's our capacity to do that level of evaluation? It may be a mix of internal staff resources and external evaluators or external collaborative partners. There's not going to be a right or wrong formula, but we need to have a great deal of evaluation, of proof that this works if we think we want to scale up our idea and help teach others to do what we have learned. As a result, we'll definitely need a combination as well of process and outcome-based evaluation so that we can show how we've learned and grown and maybe changed our idea, that we've thought about and encountered a number of variables that might influence the way that another organization would implement what we've learned. When we think about validating our work, that means that we're going to have a lot of maybe internal data that we could share or maybe formally published information that talks about what were our outputs, what were our outcomes, and here, this is what we've learned. Here, this is what you will encounter. Here, this is what, based on our experience, will be the feedback that you would receive if you also implemented this project or program in your own community. So there would be an expectation, if you're thinking about scaling up, that you have an extensive amount of data and information available to share with the grant maker and ultimately with those that might consider scaling up based on your experience and your success. So if we're thinking about what that might sound like, what that might look like, this is where visualizations will go a long way to help your reviewers digest the information, digest the evaluation activities that you've conducted, and how it is that you're using it to prove you've achieved the anticipated outcomes. We want to help connect those dots for our reviewers so that they can see the amazing work that you've done, how your evaluation efforts have proven the impact that you've created. Now, related to scaling up is the desire for grant makers to share learnings from one grantee to another. Scaling up is about taking one proven, validated idea and getting it spread around in other like organizations or in other like communities. Knowledge sharing does leave more room for interpretation. It's not about specifically taking this model and putting it elsewhere, but about saying, here are some of the nuggets we learned through our quantitative and qualitative evaluation. Here are some of the things that we think you might be interested in if you were to consider a similar idea, or if you were to try this element of our program. So the knowledge sharing is often built right into government grants, where they bring grantees together. Occasionally, you'll see foundations do something similar. They'll do a convening of grantees. The reason that grant makers pull together their grantees, whether for a conference or poster presentations or even a virtual convening, is so that ideas are shared, that they are taken out of the silo, out of the four walls of your organization, and shared with like-minded, passionate organizations and professionals. How can we share ideas? How can we provide feedback? How can we learn from each other? This is something that is often funded within a grant budget. When you see grantee meetings and maybe the guidelines require that you send a certain number of staff and that you attend a conference, maybe it's based in Washington, D.C., these are the sort of events where this knowledge sharing is happening. Yes, sometimes they will also talk about their process and procedures for reporting and closeout, but a huge purpose and why they spend those resources on bringing everyone together is related to the knowledge sharing that can happen so that your learnings can spread through other organizations, and what other organizations have learned can come to you as well. These conversations, the scaling up, taking a proven idea, the sharing of knowledge across grantees, these are fantastic ways to communicate and build funding partners, to build those relationships into something even stronger. When you're thinking about your evaluation, when you're thinking about sharing what you've learned, we want to be as transparent as possible. We don't want to hide anything from our grant makers, from our peers. We need to be open and honest about what we've learned, what some of our, maybe our roadblocks might have been, how we overcame them. And a big rule as we think about our implementation, if we learn through maybe our short-term review of our evaluation data, if we're seeing that there's something that should change, we want to probably check in with our grant makers to let them know about what we're seeing, that we might need to make a budgetary change or a program design change so that they feel like funding partners. So instead of asking for forgiveness at the report time, let's check in and maybe ask for permission or ask for input or guidance and actually say to our funders, have you encountered this with any other grantees before? Have you heard or seen anything like this? We're wondering if any of your other grantees might have knowledge to share with us. So rather than waiting for a grantee convening, let's have that conversation with our grant makers, engage them in providing input. That's definitely of significant value to our organization, even though it's not related to the specific grant award amount. So that communication with funders, this isn't something that happens in your application narrative. It's hard to describe the way that we build funding partnerships with this type of trust building and communication. But this is something that's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about the transition from the application you've written to you get the award, yay, we do a happy dance, and now we think about implementing and sustainability and building stronger funding relationships so that we get the grant award again. This piece right here is what will help connect us and start the process so that we're building those great relationships and can apply again in the future. Now, as we think about all the information we've covered in our online grant training, I want you to feel comfortable reaching out, grabbing our additional free resources at any time, wherever you are comfortable. Online, YouTube, social networks, wherever you're comfortable. So you've got a lot of options for staying in touch and getting additional resources. And of course, don't forget, if you have questions after this section or any other portion of the other modules, please feel free to reach out via email. I'm at Diane at dhleonardconsulting.com. And again, a huge thank you to the sponsors of your online grant writing training. Without their support, these modules wouldn't be available to you. So a huge thank you again to them. And as you are completing your final modules, don't forget that your certificate of completion is available to you if you complete all 5 of the online grant training modules.